Item 1.1 is to approve the agenda, and like we've done for the last few months, once we start voting, if you could announce the location that you're calling in from, please. Are there any changes? And if not, could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Mike,
I'll second.
second by Jesse. Thank you. I will go down my list. Mike,
I am, whoops, something's happening. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I vote yes, and I am in Glen Arbor, Michigan.
great. Raymond,
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
we don't have Roger yet, or Ryan. Jesse,
Yes, from Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Kathleen,
Yes, from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
and Susan.
There we go. Yes, from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay, I'm a yes. I'm also calling from Ann Arbor, Michigan. We'll move on to 1.2, public comment. Keith, if you want to go ahead and, or I should instruct, if you're calling in and want to do public comment, please press *9 if you're calling by phone, or raise your hand if you are on the Zoom.
Thank you, Chairman Sims. We do have one person with their hand up. It's Mr. Robert Pulowski. Mr. Pulowski, you've been unmuted.
Good evening. So, Robert Pulowski calling in from Southgate in Wayne County. So I'd like to bring back a subject that was brought up during the board retreat regarding careers and getting more people in the door to hiring and get more bus operators. And I believe this was Mr. Smith that brought this up. If we want to get more people in the doors and get more bus operators driving for AATA, we need more job fairs. We need more of these reach outs than I definitely agree with his point where if you have somebody that's interested in this job, reach out to them and, give them all the information, right? There's got to be some more communication if we want to get more people in the door. Smart had a list of, job fairs, one back in, I think, July, and it was a drive-through job fair. And it went super well. Even though it was COVID, it went super well. Is there a possibility it's not possible at the main office because of the property size, but is there a possibility that we could use an empty parking lot that's not being used right now within the city of Ann Arbor and have either a drive-through job fair to reach out to people that are looking for an employment and giving them the benefits and the opportunities that come with AATA, or just do a regular job fair at either Blake Transit Center in the parking lot over there or at the main office. I'd like to see more bus operators I'd like to see, the driver shortage go away hopefully soon. It don't look like it's going away, but hopefully we can, get a handle on it before next year. And I really would like to see it here most of all because of the colleges and how many people got to get to work, to school, all of it. And, I'm looking forward to it, but we need to get a handle on this soon. No disrespect, but it needs to get done. But as always, thank you so much for the time and opportunity to speak, and I hope you have a great day. Take care now.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anyone else?
We do not at this time, Chairman Sims.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 1.3. Are there any general announcements besides, I think I would like to appoint an acting secretary for this meeting. If anyone would volunteer, I would appreciate that. But if not, I will just call on someone. Really, the only reason I need to do that for this meeting is because we do have a budget amendment that will need to get signed post-meeting.
I can serve, or Kathleen, you see you raising your hand.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think we have to vote on that. So do we have a motion to appoint Jesse as acting secretary for this meeting? Mike?
I'd like to make a motion, Madam Chair, to appoint Jesse as acting secretary for this meeting.
Thanks, Kathleen. Seconded by Mike. So Mike's a yes. Raymond?
Yes.
Jesse, you agreed, so I assume you're a yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And Kathleen
Yes.
and Susan?
Yes.
I'm a yes too. Thank you. Any other announcements before we move on? No, okay. Item 2 is to approve the consent agenda. The minutes were in the packet as well as the committee meeting minutes are also there. We can discuss if there's any questions or comments in the next section, but for now, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Mike, seconded by Susan. Great, thanks. Go down my list again. Mike, you're a yes.
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Okay, so section 3.1, were there any questions or comments or further discussion on the committee meeting reports? No? Okay. Well, then I will turn it over to Dina for item 3.2, monitoring our cash and investments policy 2.6.
Thank you. You have in your packet the monitoring report 2.6 cash and investments. This report has been circulated by the board and circulated to the board and has been responded to in a survey. It has been noted as compliant. It was also reviewed at the Finance Committee meeting on August 10th. I certify that I've completed the report and all of the information is accurate. There were comments about future reports which I have reviewed and have heard and will take into consideration for the next monitoring report. Are there any questions about the report?
Oh, Raymond, go ahead.
I just have one simple recommendation. One of the questions that we have to fill out on the survey is whether the report was submitted on time. And I always find that a little hard to track down in terms of what the due date is. So I had put in one of my written comments in the past that unless I know when the due date is, I'm going to start saying they're not submitted on time. So I think it's just a simple one-liner in the memo that says report is due, whenever, and then we know whether it's submitted on time. But without that other piece of information, it always I'm sure there's a schedule out there that I can dig and find somewhere, but I haven't been able to readily put my fingers on it. So if it's something we could just include, that would be helpful.
Thank you for your comments, Raymond.
Kathleen, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. I would find that useful, but also Raymond, just in case in your board policy manual under the appendix, there's actually a chart that tells when everything is due, when, and all of that. That's what I refer to find out if the report is done on time. But I too echo what Raymond says, and that it would be much easier to just know if the report was submitted on time or if the due date could be line itemed in the request for monitoring.
Great. Yep. Thank you.
Did anybody want to comment on there were some comments, I think a couple, on the $250,000 FDIC limit. I think this came up last year as well. I think there was a good explanation, but I can't remember what it was as far as the government backed up to $250,000 for our accounts.
So that's the FDIC insured limit. And technically other limits that are above that are technically uninsured, which is why we only keep the amount of money that we need for cash flow in those accounts. That was discussed at the Finance Committee, and there was a request or a comment about maybe indicating how much that is and addressing the liquidity component of that. So that is something I'm going to consider for the next report to maybe do that just a little bit differently.
Okay, good. Kathleen, go ahead.
So this one has always puzzled me and confused me. I thought I remembered our last CFO, John, mentioned that there are multiple accounts so that the money is distributed in accounts so that it's all insured, but I might have heard that wrong. Is that true or not? Do you know?
It's not 100%. That's not, I don't know if he said that or not, but that's not the way it is. It is distributed in multiple accounts for several different reasons. One is to keep track of our cash by account. One is to get more insurability on each account. So there are reasons for that, but there are portions that we keep that are in the millions, which are, you know, above the FDIC insured amount. For the most part, though, we're only trying to keep, we would move any excess cash into a different form so that it would be covered, because there are different types of ways that you can save money and put into reserve where it earns more interest. And that's also in the report. So if you did actually kind of look into the cash and investments report a little bit further, you would see the different accounts. And I think that was a point that Mike had made in the finance committee was, could we be a little bit more clear about which ones are fully insured and which ones are not? And so that's what I'm going to try to address for you for the next one.
I appreciate that because I am not an accountant and I did review the report and try to extrapolate what everything meant. But coming from a household versus a company, there are just things that I need further explanation on. So thank you.
Sure.
Jesse?
Thank you. Yeah, so that was my comment. I think I'm probably the one who brought it up last year too. This has always bothered me because it, without knowing how much of the money that's kept in these accounts that actually is insured, I don't know that I can actually vote in compliance because I don't feel like I have any evidence that it's, you know, it's the first, you know, it says first ensuring the safety of principal. And what I don't have is any evidence in this report that the principal is in fact safe. You know, we say that they're kept in insured accounts up to $250,000, but you are talking about, you know, $5.7 million. So unless I know how much of that money is actually insured, I don't know, you know, that this doesn't actually demonstrate compliance. You simply said that the money is in accounts and insured in those accounts insured up to $250,000.
Well, I think that's what the compliance is, because it's to be compliant, it has to meet that criteria, and that's actually the case. But to your point, how do you know that the rest of the money's safe? That comes back to the credibility of the bank. And so one of the things I've already started doing is putting together some additional information that I can share with you and include with the report maybe in the future to give you a little more confidence in the actual banks that we have the money in, so that you understand the stability of the bank. That's a very important factor when you have anything above the FDIC insured limits. So kind of giving that additional information might help you be more comfortable, if you're not, that the investments, all the cash that we have is in a bank that that is FDIC insured and does back the investments. So it's not like the money would just disappear. So I'm putting together some other information that might help you with that. But I'm not sure that that's required for compliance, but it is required that we demonstrate that it's safe and secure. So maybe we can find another way to help do that.
I guess what the evidence that is, or rather the interpretation that's given for how a secure, sorry a moment, what to define, what you're using to define a secure instrument is, you're saying that Yeah, I mean, in fact, the only thing you say is that federally insured to the level of $250,000 and that the accounts generate interest. There's nothing in the report that says and that the institution has demonstrated stability. So like, I believe that these things that you're saying are true, but I'm just saying in the report, there's no evidence to say that our money is secure beyond $250,000. And I don't know where that money, I don't know how many accounts that is. So I do believe you that this is true, but I have no evidence in this report based on the interpretations given by staff.
Okay.
I'm not setting my own interpretations. I'm literally reading the interpretations as set forth, and there's nothing there that mentions the stability of the institution.
Okay, thank you for that.
And
We'll
I
address
actually, that reminds me, Dina, that comment. I think it was it probably was this report last year or 2 years ago that there was like a one pager, and it was from a regulatory agency that gave information about the banks that the accounts were at, and it kind of bolstered the evidence presentation as far as the strength of the banks. I don't remember what the source was, but I think that was included in this packet at some point. So that would probably be helpful for next time.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll be looking to do that for the next report. Thank you.
Nina, back to Kathleen's comment, I believe she was recalling what John was describing regarding the CDARS program. You might just briefly explain that.
Okay, so the CDARS program is another type of investment portfolio that is insured, and that's where we would move. If we only keep an amount outside of that, enough to cover like the operating cash that we need on a regular basis. To the extent that we would start to build cash, we would push more money into the CDARS program, which is all insured. So that might be what you're thinking of there. And to your point, Kathleen, and Mike's earlier, it might be easier if we put something in there that better illustrates that the difference between the two and how much is essentially not in the insured component.
And I have a question for the chairman of the finance committee. On page 32 of our board packet, under the monitoring policy, it says the board's conclusion, but it says specifically the finance committee has reviewed and received and reviewed the CEO's monitoring report, and that you had discussions with him and that you make the following conclusions. But nothing is filled in like A, B, C, D, or E. I don't know what the finance committee's conclusion was. Could you help fill in the blanks there for me, Mike?
Let me try to pull up the report. I believe we concluded that they were in compliance, but we did have some of those comments. If that was incomplete in the report, I apologize. I did review the report that was prepared by Keith. And let me just add one additional explanation of the CDARS program. The FDIC can insure individual bank accounts only up to $250,000. So the CDARS program, basically, and I believe it's Bank of Ann Arbor, obviously we have a whole lot more than 250,000 with Bank of Ann Arbor, but the CDARS program then takes whatever the total amount, and they have a program that spreads that out in different banks so that it is all under $250,000. It's all pretty automatic, is it not, Dina?
Yes, and that's why it's all insured.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's
without
a group of banks.
Yeah, without the CDARS program, there would be a huge amount of uninsured money there.
And that's why we push as much as we can into that. So we're not, because all of the money in that program is fully insured. So we're only keeping in the other accounts, the money that we need, that like from week to week, we need to make payroll, we need to pay things. So if we start to build a little bit more cash, I would then tell the bank we want to push more money into CDARS. So that is something that we're looking at right now. because as you may or may not have noticed, our cash balance has risen just a little bit with the reimbursement from CARES Act funds and Sarissa funds. So we're looking at our cash now to determine if we should move some more into that to make sure that there's as much insured cash and investments as possible. And I've already got additional information about CDARS, and I'd be happy to include that as part of the report. If that's something that you prefer, or whatever your pleasure, we can do a briefing on it periodically, or just include it in the report, whichever the board prefers.
I think the CDARS information would be helpful because the comment comes up every year as far as the $250,000. So I think having that actually laid out in the packet would be helpful for the board members and the public. Thank you.
Let me also add, Dina, that quarterly, when the quarterly financial report is given to the finance committee, the finance committee does look at cash and investments.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there's the formal compliance report that comes to the board only once a year, the finance committee really looks at the numbers and has the ability to question every quarter. Because we have a lot of money there. And of course, with our program where we're creating a capital reserve, there's going to be a lot more there to look at. And so it'll be growing pretty significantly over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Roger and Ryan, you've joined us in our discussion. We were talking about 2.6. Did you have any comments or questions?
I do not.
Roger, you're muted.
I'm having technical difficulties, so I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Not off the top of my head.
Thank you. So we need to vote to accept this monitoring report. Does anyone want to put forward a motion? Mike, go ahead.
I move that the board considers this report compliant.
So that's A, fully compliant. Seconded by Raymond. Okay, let's go down. Mike,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Roger,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Jesse,
Yes.
Kathleen,
Yes.
Susan.
Yes.
I'm yes as well. So that is approved unanimously. Thank you. Item 3.3 is board retreat follow-up. Matt, did you want to start that conversation, or did you want the board to kind of give their comments first?
I think we're really interested in hearing from you, your reactions, a week later, or thoughts. The process, is continuing to move forward to the next steps. Staff felt, we had a good conversation with you guys. In terms of picking your brains, it was successful. We got a lot of good information and a little more clarity on priorities, which was really helpful. But yeah, we'd love to hear what, if anything, you have to share with that, particularly from a vein of, the next step being even better. If you have any feedback for us, that'd be great.
I thought it was helpful. I liked meeting the consultants from Left Turn, Right Turn. I think they did a really good job stimulating and facilitating discussion. I think it's really hard to do retreats remotely. I think, we've done the best that we can, and it did generate good conversation. I will be interested to see what kind of the work product and recommendations are that come out of those discussions from the consultants and from the senior staff. I'd be interested to hear any other comments from the other board members, suggestions or takeaways. Jesse.
Yeah, I think I'm really interested to see how this is all distilled by staff. When we went through those activities, one, I really like getting a chance to say, yeah, these specific projects or are the things that I want to, the kind of operational stuff that we just don't get to talk about as a board because of policy governance. As a bus rider and as a bus advocate, it was very nice to get to actually talk about those real options. That said, there was a lot of yes, I'd like to do everything, and so I'm very interested to see how staff is going to take that, combined with our more conceptual priorities or philosophical priorities, and turn those into our actual operational priorities that we're going to be using when and presenting to the public when the time comes. But I just really appreciate the chance to actually have to talk about, yes, I would like to have more buses. I would like them to run more frequently.
Yeah. Anybody else? Mike?
I just want to make a technical comment. I certainly understand that doing these kinds of things remotely makes it a lot more difficult. But particularly regarding the exercises where we move the little dots around and that whole part of the exercise, I think in the future, if we have things similar to that, we really need to have instructions before the meeting, because I think we wasted quite a bit of time because we didn't have any explanations beforehand. We had some of the materials, but when we knew there were going to be exercises, I guess, similar to that. But, I finally figured it out. I think a couple of people couldn't get it working, and we could have done better if that had been worked out ahead of time.
I would like to agree with Mike on that point. I was one of the ones who I could get in and I could see what everybody was doing, but there was a little caveat in my corner that said my email was not recognized. So I don't know if it was something on my end in my computer, that prevented pop-ups or something like that. I'm not that technically savvy. Or if there was something on the end of that particular program that they were using that just was not allowing me to participate. And so I agree with Mike that it seemed to take a little bit more time. But on the other hand, we really had, I thought, a lot of really good hearty discussions around those faux pas in terms of, I think it generated more thoughtfulness because the questions were answered in such a quick manner that we only had time to give gut level perception versus a deep dive. So then on the other hand too, that maybe those materials could be presented to us ahead of time so we can give more thought to it before the meeting and then have better perceptions or answers.
Thank you. Roger, go ahead.
To sort of expand on that, I think a lot of the questioning should have been done ahead of time with the answers compiled so that we could react to what our priorities were and discuss those rather than spending a lot of time answering questions. I just think too much of the degree was spent on sort of interrogations instead of responding to what our answers to those questions were.
I'm muted. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Also, I think it would have been better had there been a little bit more opportunity for the board to basically think outside of the structure of the way the meeting was put together. I mean, it was very directed towards specific things and certainly got our opinions regarding certain issues. But I think ideally it would have been better had the board been encouraged probably to think ahead of time, like Roger was talking about, about what they see as some of the issues regarding future and planning for the future. And we were really directed into certain areas, and maybe there would have been some good other opportunities for other ideas to come forth.
Raymond?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone has said. I agree with kind of all those statements. The one thing I also wanted to highlight was I really like trade-off exercises. I forgot which of the board members mentioned it, but if we can say yes to everything, then that's not very informative. We're not making any hard decisions. And I know on some of the categories there were just a plethora of green dots with very few red diamonds. So that's why the last exercise was more meaningful to me, because we had so many points that we could attribute to different strategies. However, I think the bad side of that is I think there were kind of mixing of ideas on that last exercise where we were, and we talked about this a little bit as a board in terms of, some of them were kind of whats and some of them were hows, and, how we voted on those, I think was a little clunky. So, but I am interested in the next step. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how, the feedback that from this retreat and past engagement exercises, how that's going to start to, manifest into something more tangible and come together in a plan. So that's the piece I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I think that's another point to the constraints of a virtual meeting, or even just the time constraints, because I think if we had done those exercises and then been able to have further discussion after, especially after the trade-off one, we might have been able to say, okay, here are our key takeaways, like we've done at prior board retreats, and we weren't really able to do that. But I also think having a full day virtual retreat is very brutal. So I think we kind of did the best that we can, but it would have been nice, like everyone has kind of said, to have more of a, okay, let's synthesize this and be able to move forward with it now. So we feel like we came out of the retreat with some key bullet points and goals that we want to hit or see and work toward. And I'm sure we'll get that at some point, but it might be another half-day retreat, or we might have to replicate that in another way down the road, maybe after we get more information from the senior leadership.
Just for the record, I know everyone is expressing some frustration with the way we had to do things and wanting to have done the exercises beforehand. But, for this guy here, and I can only speak for me, I'm unfortunately relegated to working from a device that's about the size of a Casio calculator. So I did appreciate the fact that I could participate with that exercise, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able. So, I certainly feel the frustration of wanting to move things along more quickly, but it was nice to have had the option to participate. So just throwing that out there for discourse, but all of your comments, I do hear you loud and clear.
Thanks, Ryan. Any other comment? Go ahead, Susan.
Just as the newbie, I just want to thank staff. We didn't get to a lot of other ideas other than reacting to what was in front of us, but I found the exercise helpful to me to help me crystallize my own thinking. And my takeaway from it was to center on the thought, I think Raymond said it, the goal is to gain ridership. It's sort of distilled down to something that basic. And it was helpful to go through the whole exercise to get me to that place, because I operate from a central operating framework. And so I thank staff for the opportunity to help me to narrow in on something that fundamental. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's move on to Matt, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to sort of just follow up on Susan's comment on Raymond's comment, because I thought Raymond had an interesting point. When I first got here in 2015, someone told me TheRide probably has the capacity to intensify your services within your existing footprint or expand your footprint into broader areas, but you probably can't do both at once. And I thought that was an interesting way of thinking about our organizational capacity that sort of stuck with me. And Raymond's comment at the retreat about focusing on what we're good at, mass transportation, and doing the best job possible there. I thought that was intriguing because in the past, we've also been asked to do a variety of other things, and finding the right balance between exciting new projects and sort of the meat and potatoes that we need to execute perfectly is going to be part of the challenges. So we really appreciated all of your feedback. I recognize that retreats online are unsatisfying because you can't even talk over each other. Think about how many meetings you get are fun because you talk over each other and you get to exchange ideas in real time, and that's just not possible with this technology. But I think it was valuable. I appreciate all your feedback today. We take it constructively. We'll try to make the next steps reflect that. And we look forward to, as Jesse was saying, getting down to sort of more project level and specific stuff. So if the plane's been at 30,000 feet, we're gradually descending and getting closer and closer to detail. So thank you very much. We appreciate your feedback.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, let's move on to 4.1. This is the August service restoration update. Brian, did you want to start?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. So members of the board, as I've mentioned, when we've been talking about this item over the last 3 months, we did have a plan, and we felt that we had a certain amount of confidence that we would be in okay shape come the fall. I forget who said it, but no good plan survives first contact, and we are no strangers to the labor shortage. So even though we had started hiring in March and April, we've had a wave of retirements, people who were eligible who just decided that this summer was their last summer. And operating a bus isn't for everyone. So even with the classes that we did have, we had people drop out of those classes when they discovered that this job wasn't what they wanted to do. So we've continued to modify that plan and come up with contingencies and continued to hire, and still have 2 classes planned, as I had mentioned in my email from this morning. And the last resort that we have always held out as a possibility, but hopefully one we wouldn't have to engage, would be to pull service from the street. And at this time, we are planning on continuing to suspend Route 68 until we have enough operators to fill all of our routes. And then on a daily basis, if we have to, we'll down a block or so of high frequency routes, so that instead of a 9-minute wait, you might have a 12-minute wait or an 18-minute wait. But generally, you shouldn't notice too much of a difference on those routes. We're also depending on our projections that ridership won't just bounce back immediately to pre-pandemic levels, and so that drop in frequency won't be too overly burdensome. And we'll do that only when we need to. One of the advantages of the technology that we have just installed actually got up and working earlier this year with disruption management. We will be able to communicate with riders in real time that we'll be able to pull that bus out of the real-time system, so that nobody should be waiting at a stop looking for a ghost bus or a bus that's not going to come. We do plan on communicating this in every way possible, rider alerts and through our website, and signs at the affected stops, and that we're going to continue to work hard to fill this labor shortage. Unfortunately, with the rise in cases, I don't have a predicted end to it. My hope, if I can go out on a limb, would be that by the beginning of next year, we would be in a better place. But I don't want to make a promise that I can't keep. So I'll say that that's my hope, but I wouldn't be able to guarantee it. That's all there is for fixed route service restoration. I can also comment that MV has taken over approximately half of the service already in our slow transition for TheRide. And they are set at the end of this week to take over the rest of the service, so that by August 29th, they are fully operating the service and we're able to concentrate on fixed routes alone.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I suspect I'm not the only one on the board who doesn't know the majority of the route numbers and where they are. And specifically, I don't know where Route 68 is. Could you say what that is?
Certainly, Route 68 is a crosstown route in Ypsilanti that services an area, and I can bring up a map. Well, actually, I may not be able to bring up a map at the moment, but it services north and south.
Brian, I think you went out for a second, or might have just been me. Could you repeat that?
Certainly, my apologies. It goes on the east side of Ypsilanti. It is generally a north-south route or a crosstown route across Ypsilanti. It is. There are several other routes that cross the same pattern, but it's the only one.
Uh-oh.
So with it not having run since March of last year, we're hoping that this will affect the least number of people possible with this route being off the road.
So sorry, you got cut off again. If you go, I might jump in. The 68 was one of the routes that was proposed to be eliminated as part of the initial service restoration plan. But after the initial feedback, staff decided to keep it on. It is an east side of Ypsilanti route that does not actually connect to the YTC. It more, as they says, is a crosstown connector that connects a few other of the spoke routes that serve the east side of Ypsilanti.
Thank you.
Roger, go ahead.
I just want to empathize with Brian. In my over 30 years in business, I've never seen a labor market like this. Trying to apply for jobs. What he's saying is certainly true.
Thanks, Roger. Any other discussion from the board? Jesse?
Brian, I was reading another article today about this similar yet larger problems that Detroit is having, and they're talking about pullout rates, like morning pullout rates of 57% or afternoon pullout rates of 77%. Are those the kinds of numbers that we should be bracing for, like only 75 to 50% of our buses actually making it to their stops?
Good Lord, I hope not. So far, our contingency plan has identified the 68 and then an additional, I believe, 6 bus blocks that we would down. So we're hoping to not have anywhere near that level of pullout rate. I would say that our pullout rate, we would still aim for, well, I don't want to come up with a percentage off the top of my head, but we would still aim for a very high pullout rate because we'll utilize the extra board that we do have for any kind of daily call off. And we also have a number of personnel in the office that are able to go and drive.
Thank you. To me, this really seemed to be the lack of real-time bus information at the stops. This really, I feel like we're really at a disadvantage not having that implemented. I ride the 4, which is the most heavily traveled route in the system, and I can't think of a single stop between Ypsilanti and the Blake that has real-time bus information. is our most traveled route. I think there was one on like going from Ann Arbor to Ypsilanti. It's on Washington that does, but seems like it's going to be really hard to get this kind of information out. And if this is if we're looking at a long-term issue of needing to be flexible, that seems like it might be worth reprioritizing some resources into making sure that riders who are not equipped with smartphones or know that the information is available online, that they have a way of getting that information. So if they're not waiting for a bus that's not going to come.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Any other comments, questions from the board? Okay. If not, we can move on to 4.2, which is the fiscal year 2021 budget amendment. It's been discussed in detail at the governance level and at the finance committee. I'll turn it over to Dina. Just one note I want to make before you begin. I'm sure you'll cover it in the presentation, but I think it's helpful just to set up the framework that the reason for the amendment is really a clarifying of language amendment, not necessarily a substantive amendment. So I just want to give that background before I hand it over to you, Dina.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's an excellent point. Thank you for introducing it that way. This proposed amendment is consistent with the strategic approach of the funding optimization strategy that the board approved and is familiar with back in April. And really all it is we looked at the way that was presented in the financial statements and recognized that it would be better to more accurately reflect the current projection of property tax revenues for fiscal year 2021 and show the surplus of the revenues over expenses and how that will then go into the capital reserve as was discussed in April. So that pretty much summarizes it. The amendment or the resolution itself really just addresses that local property tax revenues will be updated to more accurately represent the projected revenues for the fiscal year, and that any excess is anticipated to be and will be transferred to the capital projects account or capital reserve. And that is assumed right now to be 11.9 million. Again, we haven't closed out fiscal year 2021. So when we do, we'll know what that number is. And that is the summary of the amendment. Does anybody have any questions?
Jesse, go ahead.
Just a quick question. The term surplus, since we have a requirement to run a balanced budget, does identifying a surplus put us in any danger of violating that idea?
Thank you for that question. It is considered a balanced budget if the expenses are met by at least the minimum by revenues or greater, or the revenues can be greater than expenses in a balanced budget. So this is considered a balanced budget. We do show at the bottom the reserve transfer, the estimated reserve transfer. So it does come out to zero at the end, but it is considered a balanced operating budget as long as the revenues are sufficient to meet or exceed expenses.
Okay, so even though the transfer is not considered an expense because the overall net is zero, and because we don't have any unfunded mandates or anything unfunded in the budget, we are still balanced.
Right, that's
okay,
right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dina, just for me to add on to that point a little bit, and correct me if I'm saying anything incorrectly here, but I believe our audited financial statements prepared by our auditors after year end will actually show a surplus. And there will certainly be an indication in there about that surplus then being considered to be part of the capital reserve. But
yes.
I think the actual financial statement will show a surplus. Is that correct?
Yes. And if I might add to that, the amendment will more accurately reflect what you'll see in the financial statements from a budgetary perspective, which is a key purpose of the amendment.
Thank you, Dina. Any other questions? Do I have a motion to, in support of the amendment of the 2021 operating budget? That's included in our packet. It's page 38 of the entire packet. Susan? Seconded by Mike? Yeah. Okay. Roger, did you have a comment before we vote? Oh, okay. Mike?
Yes,
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
I vote yes also. That amendment passes unanimously. And we will move on to 4.3, which is the Q3 finance report. Latasha, are you going to start us off with that? Or Dina, whoever wants to go.
I think she's nodding for me to go, so
Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and go. I just have a brief presentation for the quarter. I know we have a full schedule tonight, and so I'm going to briefly share my screen and make sure I get the right one. I think I'm sharing.
Yep.
And all right. So for the third quarter report, this quarter, I just want to emphasize a couple of points. You did just pass an amended budget, and that is what the report is reflecting. We had already updated the quarter report expecting that it would get passed. And also, you will see the funding strategy that was passed in April of this year, which is different than the previous quarter report. So you will see that surplus reflected on the quarter report based on our funding strategy, our new funding strategy for the year. And the story for the third quarter is very similar to the second quarter in that we were operating below budget. We are still under a reduced service plan for the third quarter. That is going to be shortly changing in the next week or two. And so we still are operating below budget. We have a 9.48 million surplus for the quarter. And we did operate with expenses at 29 million year to date. That was 2.9 million less than the budget. As I said, due to the reduced service plan. And obviously that causes all of our expenses to be less at this time. And with the pandemic, with the lower ridership that we have, our revenue is also below budget. We had revenues of 38.6 million for the quarter, and that was 2.4 million less than the budget. We are spending our CARES funding, and to date, we have drawn $14.2 million. And I just want to touch upon a few things for the balance sheet. We are still in a strong net position on our balance sheet due to our cash being strong still. We have low expenses, so that allows our cash to be still strong. And also with the pandemic relief funds, that is staying very stable. And there's not too much movement in the other areas of the balance sheet, but I did want to note that we are reflecting our reserves on the balance sheet now. You do see the operating reserve at almost $10.7 million. We have the insurance reserve and the capital reserve that was passed through the board earlier this year. And that capital amount, that capital reserve at $1 million is really a previous, and if you remember, maybe in January of this year, we had initially passed a capital reserve of $1 million. We have since superseded that $1 million as far as what we are projecting. As I said, we have projecting right now 9.4 $8 million in surplus funds that will go to the capital reserve. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. If you have any questions, I know that we have a full schedule, so we did not want to belabor the quarter report.
Thank you, Latasha. Any questions, comments from board members? I can't see you all at the moment, so if you do want to comment, just start talking. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to 4.4 then, the fiscal year 2022 draft budget preview. And Dina, your turn again.
Great. We have prepared a presentation for you. I guess I'm going to start it off. Latasha, I believe, is going to share her screen here in a couple of minutes. And we'll start with that. But I will share with you Latasha, I don't know if you can change that to presentation view so that the notes and maybe aren't showing. But so the draft budget has been presented, a preliminary budget has been presented at several committee meetings, all the committee meetings, I should say. Thank you for that. All the committee meetings. And so this presentation is key points from those presentations. We have distributed to you the budget book, and that is also on our website and has been publicly noticed. So there's a lot of information starting to circulate on the budget publicly, as well as the presentations you've seen and this more abbreviated version of the presentation. And I am ready to start. If we can get that back up.
Okay, let me know if I'm in the right. Is it on the right screen?
I think if you go to presentation mode at the very top there.
Okay, let me stop and try again. Maybe I'm not.
I think you had it for a moment there.
Okay. I'm doing the same thing I usually do. Nobody's doing something different. So let's see. Let me try one more time. With the screen that you want?
Sure.
Yes.
It's probably better if it's a little bit bigger and doesn't show the notes.
Try that display settings and there should be a
Okay, there we go. Is that what you were looking for?
That's perfect.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you. All right, you can move forward, please. So our agenda tonight is to do a brief budget introduction where we're going to talk about the timeline and some highlights. And then as we move through, we're going to discuss the draft budget, the operating budget, the capital budget, and some conclusions that we've come to. And of course, take questions along the way or at the end, whichever you prefer. Next slide. So to start out, this is the budget timeline. It's been updated a little bit just to kind of ground everybody where we've been, what we've been doing and where we're going. So you can see that in May and June, we had staff budget development. And then, as you know, we've done a budget preview with the board of directors from the end of July until August 10th. Today, we are presenting the draft budget to you, the board, and we have also publicized the budget and invited public comment at this meeting. We have also set up a staff budget overview and public comment session for September 7th. That will be led by staff, and it will be an opportunity for the public to review and comment on the budget. We will do a brief presentation and invite the public to comment. And then in September, we're going to present the recommended budget for approval and also do the official public hearing where the public can again comment. Between September 7th and September 23rd, we have committee meetings. And at those committee meetings, we will share any other updates on the budget as we move through the budget process, as well as any public comments that we've received as of the date of each committee meeting, so that you'll all be briefed through the process as we're moving through it. And then again, on September 23rd, we will do the same. As we've discussed before, the budget really follows policies and best practices. We have sound financial practices. We're presenting strategic and multi-year planning. We meet generally accepted accounting principles. We comply with all of our state regulations. Everything that we require to do to be in compliance for the state, the federal government, as well as board policies. In addition, the budget really is focused on being in alignment with our corporate business plan, and we are focused on advancing our board ends. As you see here, we have created a few symbols to help us through the presentation to maybe focus on key objectives that we're focused on. We're focused on supporting community recovery, planning for the future, serving our customers, and modernizing the ride. The budget that we're presenting tonight provides for restoring services to pre-pandemic levels as part of helping our communities return to normal as we emerge from the pandemic or move forward through other impacts of the pandemic. And operating expenses are rising proportionately, so that is something that you will see as we move through. Also, as we move through the budget, we'll focus on strategic initiatives and things that we've included in our budget, and we'll kind of link them back to these key objectives. So you can see the link between the board ends and the business plan, as well as the budget. So some key messages that we have tonight is that we have increasing costs and reductions in revenue, and those things are putting pressure on our budget. But we do have pandemic relief funds that provide short-term relief and give us the opportunity to continue to fully serve our community as it recovers from the pandemic, as well as plan, design, and fund capital projects for facilities that are critically important to our communities. We're also evaluating projections and recommending solutions for the structural deficit that does still occur and is being helped a little bit in the short term, or a lot in the short term, from the federal relief money. But we are financially stable, and we are going to be presenting a balance. We are presenting a draft balanced budget and anticipating presenting a balanced FY 2022 budget for approval in September. There are some key highlights that I'd like to mention before we get into some of the more details of the operating budget. As I mentioned, our operating expenses are increasing to $55.8 million. We're restoring fixed route service to full levels. We're restoring GoldRide services, and we have an improved contract for TheRide. We are leveraging $18.6 million of federal relief funds. Those are CARES Act and SRISA funds. And we are anticipating a surplus of local funds of $12.9 million, which will be eligible to fund the capital reserve. So it's in alignment with the plan that the board discussed earlier this year. The strategy, it's aligned with the strategy that the board has approved, and we'll have enough money of local funds to kind of meet the contribution that we had discussed back then for both 21 and 22. In terms of the capital budget, we have an $11.7 million capital budget for a fiscal year of 2022, which provides $9.1 million in fleet and facility capital investments. And there's plenty of detail on that to come. And it includes planning and design funding for the YTC and the BTC. So we do have capital funding planned, and you'll see that a little bit later in the presentation on how those will be funded. But we're focused right now in the first year on the planning and design. As we move through, I'm going to turn this over to Latasha to talk about some of the details of the budget. There will be key strategies and initiatives also noted throughout there. So Latasha, if you want to move forward.
Sure. So Dina did a very good job of summarizing exactly what our 2022 budget and our forecast is looking like. And what I want to do here is I just want to give you the picture of what it looks like from a graph where you can actually see how our revenues and expenses are moving for the next 7 or 8 years. So you see in 2021 and through 2024, how we have the increase of revenues, our federal relief revenues coming in, and you see how we have a surplus for those years, 2021 to 2024. At the end of 2024, that is where we are going to expect that we will see a deficit coming about, a structural deficit if nothing is done at this time. And you will see that our revenues start to decrease and the expenses are exceeding those revenues from 2025 to 2029. And so those are the years that we have that need to be addressed. Obviously, we do not want to operate a deficit, but this gives you the long-term view of where we see the operating budget going. So for there, I want to know some key considerations when you're looking at the 2022 budget in the board packet. We did compare the 2022 budget to 2020, and that was because that was the last time that we were operating at full service levels. And so we didn't want to compare it to the prior year, as that really did not, that would not have been a good comparison at this time. And so we also want to note that instead of 1 year of inflation, we have 2 years of inflation. So that increase, part of that, you'll see a 14% increase is part of that is 2 years of inflation. One thing that key area that did increase was our insurance, and that was not due out of just normal inflation, but there are some market cost pressures that are going, market-driven cost pressures that are going on there. And we have seen a 15 to 20% increase each year for us. And it's not necessarily for the ride particularly, but it is for the industry that those increases are occurring. So some other key considerations that you will want to take to note for 2022 is that many of the initiatives that we are trying to do for next year are in line or aligned with our business plan. And those 4 key areas of planning for the future, supporting community recovery, modernizing the ride, serving customers. And you'll see here the different initiatives that we have that correlate with those key drivers. And you will see those also reflected in those expenses. So for instance, for planning for the future, the long range plan and the millage education efforts, you will see those reflected in our contracted services. For the service recovery plan, you'll see that reflected throughout. Obviously, that's going to affect most of our line items, higher wages, higher expenses across the board. Pandemic related safety measures, those are things like PPE, cleaning, our mobile ticketing project. You see that we have a new TheRide contract, and that is increasing our cost there. We restored Gold Ride, that increased our cost as far as from purchase transportation. And just to note, we are expecting to do a propulsion study to study the cost benefits of electric buses. And those are all going to be reflected in our expenses. And I think in the committee, we went line by line, but for the board, we didn't want to go into every single detail, as I know that many of you have already seen it, and it is in the budget book. So here are the expenses by category, and we won't go through them, but you see, as Dina said, we are at $55.8 million, and that's a 14% increase from 2020. And you see the various increases across the board. For our revenue, on the revenue side, there are some key factors that we want to consider as well. So for our fare revenue, we are still expecting our fare revenues to be a lot less than 2020, but that they will take some time, much longer than probably we expected last year, to recover due to the pandemic. And we'll give you a better idea of that in the next slide, but they will take some time to recover. Our local property tax revenues, they have been increasing 5 to 6% in the last 2 years. And the assumption in this budget, we use a 6-year average of 3.5% increase. So you won't see that high of an increase, but they have been increasing, and we use a longer range average to determine our property tax revenues for this year. You will see a full impact of D2A2 service. Back in 2020, we only had half of a year. And so for this year, we have a full year impact of that service. And just to know, that service is fully recovered or fully funded by our federal and state funding. So it is not something that we're paying for out of our local property taxes. The last thing we want to note here is that one of the biggest line items you will see is our federal pandemic relief, as Dina already expressed, is at 18.6 million, and that will be from the CARES and the CRISA funds for next year. So this slide gives you just a better example, or not example, but shows you exactly where our ridership has been and where we are expecting it to go. In 2019, we were at 6.4 million in ridership. You see the significant drop in 2020 and 2021. And we are expecting for next year to get back up to 68.6% of the 2019 ridership, back up to 4.4 million, and to continue to increase from there till we get to about 100%. And then after that, the assumption is that we would have 1% increases after that point, but it will take some time. And I think when I looked at the projections, I think it's at 2030 when we would get back up to the 2019 levels. So it will take quite some time. And here are the budgeted revenues for 2022. We have 68.5 million in revenues compared to 49 in 2020, a 39% increase. And obviously the biggest driver of that increase is the federal pandemic relief funds that you see there. We did want to give you some more information on the proposed fare changes as we expressed in previous committee and board meetings. And just to remind everyone that those changes are listed here. We are decreasing our day pass and our 30-day passes, the multiple for them, not the base fare, but just the multiple for our day and our 30-day pass. And we are also introducing a reduced day pass for $1.50. And we are eliminating the night ride and holiday ride surcharge of $2. And these changes, if they are passed, they will take effect in early 2022. We will be working with the various areas, internal areas like community relations, and with our provider that does the fare passes to make sure exactly what that timing would be, but it would be scheduled for early 2022. So looking at the long-term impact of the fare change proposal, we did want to show that as well. And so what the graph on the right is trying to show you is in 2019, for fixed, and just to be clear, this is fixed route revenue. This is not total passenger revenue. This is just for fixed route because that is our biggest portion of passenger fares. So for 2019, for illustrative purposes, we have a almost 4.5 million in revenue that we were receiving for fixed route in 2019. And then for our expectation in 2022, you see that the baseline is $3 million. If the fare change was proposed, you see a slight drop in that revenue expected. And it would take, I think here, 2032 to get back up to the 2019 levels, to exceed those 2019 levels. And the reason because of that is just due to the long time that it would take for ridership to recover, not necessarily because of the fare change. As I said, 2030 is when we will get back up to 100% of 2019 ridership levels. And we did also want to note the other benefits of this fare change. It will simplify the fare structure. It will allow us to be consistent with our other fare products that we have. It would improve the equity by removing that surcharge for night ride and holiday ride. And it was overall supports the ridership recovery for our community. So just to wrap up the operating budget, I just want to note just some key things that we've already known them before, but just to remind everyone that we do have several factors that are causing our expenses to increase, from inflation to the pandemic to service restoration. We also have some revenues that are not rising at the same rate, our fare revenue being in particular. There may be some state property tax laws that could change our local funding in the future, and that in the future there could be some entities that might take or reduce our federal funding, like the RTA that we have mentioned in the committee meetings. We are still experiencing a structural deficit. We are getting some short-term relief from our federal relief funds, but that structural deficit is still present, as we've shown you, and will be expected to be realized in 2025. And we do have a balanced budget, which is important. We are presenting a balanced budget, and we have some surplus of local funds of $12.8 million. So I'm going to move on to the capital budget at this time. And here are the highlights of the capital budget. We are providing, we have budgeted for $9.1 million for fleet and facility capital investment. That includes replacing 8 low emission diesel buses. That is the usual standard schedule for our buses, to replace 8 a year. We have the garage roof and the hayback replacement that we have in that budget, along with some architectural and engineering work for our facilities. We also have included $1.3 million of plan and design for the Ypsilanti Transit Center and Blake Transit Center. That's something that has been in the works prior to this year. And now that we have more funds, we are going to explore those 2 projects. And then lastly, there is a little less than $1 million for technology upgrades and bus stop improvements. And here is a summary of the 2022 budget at $11.7 million, where you can see the capital budgets categorized by state of good repair, value added, research and development and expansion, and what our funding sources will be. For 2022, it is fully funded, and we are using primarily state and federal grants. We are using just a small portion of our capital reserve, as we have enough state and federal grants to fund those projects for 2022. But looking at the long term, you will see that there is definitely a need for more funding if we want to pursue those projects. The budget is quite large for the next 9 years, from 2023 to 2031, as we explore some larger projects. And we've only, at this time, we are just a little less than 60% funded. And the next slide shows you exactly what projects are funded at this point. And the main projects that are not funded, based on our current funding levels, would be the bus garage project, bus landing construction, bus rapid transit, and a little bit of technology upgrades would still need some more funding. Obviously, this is not a concrete set in stone plan. These things can be, obviously pushed around or changed, but this is a plan that we are presenting for board comment and review. And lastly, for the capital budget, I did want to show the capital reserve, how the money would come in from the operating budget and how it would be used. We are expecting about 42.5 million of local funds to come into the capital reserve from 2021 to 2024, and that the use of those funds will take up until 2026. Obviously, those projects can go longer than what we expect, but this is the current plan, and that we would be able to use those funds through 2026. And then lastly, just to conclude, as Dina has already spoken on our key message for this budget, we have increasing costs, we have some reductions in our revenue, but we do have the pandemic relief funds to help us in the short term to be able to fully serve our community as it recovers from the pandemic, to be able to fund the capital projects, those things that are very important to our community. We are able to evaluate what our projections are right now and how we can address the structural deficit. And we are still financially stable for 2022 with a balanced budget. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Latasha. Thank you, Dina. Board members, questions, concerns, comments? Susan, go ahead.
So again, I'm going to keep playing the newbie card. So one of the drivers of ridership in the past had been the shortfall of parking, and it helped to encourage people to consider another mode to get to work. As part of the calculation on revenues, are we in conversation with the university or the DDA about the parking demand? At least the last time I was in the downtown, there was an ample amount of parking spaces available. And at least as far as that competitive edge, there may be many people considering driving to work since they can find ready parking. Is that a part of the calculation on where you are with fare revenues? Again, the university, is perhaps an even more dramatic example. When they're constrained on parking, it does encourage other people to encourage people to try other modes. So just curious.
I can take that a little bit. I think I would say that mostly what we're focused on when we're talking about fare revenues is looking at our projected ridership, which I think gets more to the core of maybe what you're asking, because you're saying that if parking was constrained, it might drive more passengers to our system. So with regard to the projection for ridership, I think that would be that's something that maybe I'd ask Forrest to comment on how that's developed.
Sure. Thanks, Tina. Thanks for the question, Susan. I think it's a good point. When we project ridership for the short-term recovery for the next, I would say, three years, we anticipate, based on the information we have, we did reach out to university. We haven't talked a lot of details with DDA related to park. We only know, their parking demand today. For university demand for the next few years, they project, slowly coming back. But that's kind of what our ridership would reflect to probably within 3-5 years, all jobs will be recovered in the downtown area, university. So based on that, we basically project, kind of a gradually recovery of our ridership. But then after that kind of a 3-5 year period, we assume a steady, like a slow, steady recovery. And that's why when Latasha mentioning the ridership assumption is until 2030, we are going to recover the full ridership in 2019. So that's kind of our best guesstimate at the moment, because we really have no detailed information to do a lot of modeling for the ridership projection. But we did look into the university numbers. We did speak to them, but certainly, in terms of reaching out to DDA and getting more of their projections, I think that's definitely helpful. Thank you.
And I might add, these are our assumptions currently. Clearly, if things are changing faster, we'll update our projections and keep the board informed. But these are the assumptions that we base the budget on right now.
I had a question. Sorry, Kathleen, hold on. about the inflationary factors that were listed earlier in the presentation. So I know that the insurance issue, it sounded like, was pre-pandemic and it's just continued, but are there other aspects of inflation that we're concerned about, as far as, do we think that most of what we're seeing is going to be transitory, or are some of the other things outside of insurance that are subject to what we're seeing in the market right now maybe more fixed inflationary issues?
Are you speaking about insurance directly or other things that might impact? I'm not.
All of the factors that went into your thinking on
Okay.
inflation and how that's impacting the long term.
Okay, so the trending has been, there has been quite a bit of inflation in the past couple of years. As we're moving through pandemic, there was a lull and now it's kind of picking up again. So our inflationary factors, we try to base it on like historical trends, unless we know of something else that's disruptive. The insurance market issue, that is something that I have seen across the transportation industry, and it is something that we're bringing to your attention, that we're focusing on that. That is the current renewal rate that we have, but we are very focused on looking at that and different ways on how we might mitigate the market risk for our bottom line. So one thing could be to explore a different percentage of self-insurance versus fully insured. So we're fully insured right now, and self-insurance might be something that we would consider, especially since we do have a reserve. So that would get us one step closer. I'm also, gathering information from our insurance broker on what's happening in the industry, to get a full understanding of what is really leading that, and if there's anything else we can do to mitigate that. But generally, what we're seeing is a trend across the country for transit and transportation based on liability claims that have been rising broadly, not specifically to the ride. But we are certainly taking that seriously and looking at ways to mitigate that. And we would do that with any other risk that we would see with regard to non-normal inflationary factors. But so far, I don't have any to share with you other than that one for this budget so far.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When the report was given, we were talking about the federal relief funds, and CARES and CARISA were mentioned. And I'm wondering, the American Recovery Plan, there has been talk in the wind. And I'm just wondering, what are our plans, or where are we with that? And is that part of the budget as well?
I think Matt wants to comment.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one because we do have new information today. So CRISA and CARES, all our federal monies, since the RTA was brought into existence, prior to the RTA, federal funds more or less flowed directly to the RIDE. Since the RTA was created, I think in 2013, the federal funds have flowed through the RTA and then get distributed to the transit agencies like ourselves. The CARES and CRISA Act, as I think all of you know, those funds were fully passed through 100% to the transit agencies quite some time ago. And Dina and Latasha are doing a good job of spending them down. This afternoon, the RTA board did meet, and they did make a final decision about the American Rescue Plan funds. They have decided to immediately release 80% of those funds to the transit agencies. They are going to hold back 20% of those funds for their own uses. My understanding is that 5% of those funds will be used to fund their own staffing needs for several years, and 15% will be sort of set aside to fund regional projects to be determined. And they do not have a process yet for deciding which projects will be funded. They do not have a list of projects, and they have gone to great pains to reassure us agencies that they will be working with us to develop those ideas and perhaps select them. So what the good news here, I guess bad news is that the American Rescue Plan Fund, we're going to take about a $5.5 million hit on that. The positive side is that the 80% of the rescue plan funds will begin to flow immediately, and Dina and Latasha can begin to spend those down right away. Unlike CARES and CRISA, the rescue plan funds do actually have a deadline, a sunsetting. If we don't spend them, if we don't use it, we will lose it. So now that those funds are becoming available, we will shift to spending those to spend them down. So 80%, better than 50% or 0%. So a bird in the hand, perhaps. That's a larger issue and certainly speaks to our relationship to the RTA. But I did want to let you all know that decision, my understanding is that the decision was made this afternoon.
And when
Kathleen, I would just add, thank you, first of all, Matt, for sharing that. We would then shift to the funds that we would need to expend first because if there's a time limit on it. But we wouldn't use or require to use all of those funds in the next fiscal year. So that those funds will last us, as we kind of talked about in the presentation, until about 2024. And so that's right now the timeline based on the amount of money that we're getting, that we think we will be using. We will be using them as quickly as we have eligible expenses to get reimbursed by those.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, go ahead.
I had kind of a list of questions. So if other people have questions, I'm happy to kind of stagger mine out. A lot of them have to do with the long-term projections, but a few have to do with tiny things. One, with the projected revenue over expense, is that I don't know how big of a factor the GoldRide contract is for that. I mean, we've talked about how we have right now, and perhaps we're hoping to get a more cost-effective GoldRide contract in the future than what we have right now. Are we working under the assumption that we will get that contract, or are we working under assumption of the current contract as it stands?
I believe, and Latasha, please jump in if I have misunderstood, but my understanding is that we are basing it on the current costs as a conservative approach. Does not minimize our effort to do something more cost effective or change that, but currently from a conservative approach, that's the assumption.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of like the decisions that we are going to have to make going forward, whether this should be one of them or whether that was kind of.
Latasha, did you have something to add? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure.
The only thing that I was going to add to that, it is based off the current cost, but it's not inflated in the future years because we are, if you remember part of the proposal, it was that to constrain the cost and not allow the cost to increase based off demand. So it's not inflated every year. It's not inflated.
Okay.
Thank you.
A couple just, I mean, they're minuscule, but I'm just wondering what they were. On page 22 of the budget book, there's something called out as equity consulting. I was wondering what that was. You defined what the millage renewal consulting and the electric bus study, but you didn't actually define the equity.
And you know what, this is actually a consultant that Matt's area is doing. So I'm going to give that to him to explain exactly what this equity consultant would be doing. I believe it's something that Rosa Maria and maybe Matt will be working with.
I apologize. I had to step away from my computer. What was, could someone repeat the question?
His question was, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say on page 22 of the budget book, in explaining the consulting costs, one of the items was equity consulting, and I was wondering what that was in regards to.
Sure.
Maybe Matt, if I may, I can jump in here.
No, I'm fine. This is a CEO driven. This is the CEO internal staff equity question, not a service question. Sorry, there's multiple equity issues going on. This particular one is a set aside, a placeholder for a project I've envisioned now for about a year and a half to do sort of an internal equity audit. Like many of you, I've been the importance of internal equity between genders, among races, among classes, has really been reinforced for me recently. And I was struck, early last year by a report I read where a CEO of a private company had assumed that his pay scale was fair and was treating men and women equally. And that this CEO, I think it was of Zapatos, that online shoe retailer, and he was mortified to discover when he hired a consultant to do an audit that females were paid less categorically across the board. And he was really stunned to discover that. And so there's been a lot of work over the last year or two from a lot of organizations about diversity, equity, and inclusion internally. It's always been in my mind that I wanted to do something similar. I'm not actually too concerned about our pay scale. That's just one example of internal equity. We recently just went through a big work about that. So I'm not too worried about that. But what are the other things that perhaps we don't know? So there's been a lot of work in the transit industry about doing diversity, equity, and inclusion audits, reviews, assessments, and we're still struggling with the scope of this and trying to work through what that would be. But it's very much an internal focused idea at this stage. It's very much about how the agency treats staff. I am not aware of any major flaw or failing in the agency. You have policies that we report that we compliance with, and as far as I know, we do comply with all of your expectations. But this is, can we go the extra mile? Can we peel back a little bit more, and what will we find? So that's what this is. It's a placeholder for an internal review of treatment of staff along sort of the diversity, equity, and inclusion lines. But I do not have a scope yet. Rosa Maria and Gwen from HR are working on this. Rosa's been deployed with her National Guard unit, so it's hit a bit of a delay. But it is something I hope to pick up again in the coming year.
Thank you for that. Moving on to another clarification of a definition, right below that is there's something called media under types of other expenses, also on page 22. And is that like media communications? Is that like storage media? Just trying to figure out what that term was.
I believe this has to do with like any of the online any type of media that we advertise on. This would be included in that line.
So this is more communications.
Yes, it's definitely a communication line item. Exactly.
All right, thank you. All right. I know it's a minuscule thing. I noticed that but it had gone, the budget was actually less than 2019 by 10%.
Exactly. And it probably was way under budget in 2020 because that was when the pandemic hit. So they may look like, the expenses dropping, but if I probably went back to the actuals, I'm sure it did not meet that budget there.
I think this is my last one. I appreciate my fellow board members for sticking with me on this one. On page 30, under the value added for the 10-year capital plan, the bus lane planning and construction shows a huge jump from 2025 to 2026 from 50,000 to 5 million. And that seemed notable to me. Is that just a misplace of a decimal, or is that what's happening? What's happening in 2025, 2026?
This probably, go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to jump in. I will confess that this is very much one of the more speculative parts of the capital plan. We hope that there can be discussions about dedicated bus lanes in the near future, and we're essentially roughing in a placeholder in the budget in case that emerges. This is done really for the idea of trying to fill out a 10-year capital plan with our best guess until we have that long-range service plan approved by the board. Once that service plan is approved, that will become the blueprint, and many of these assumptions might change based on your direction, but this is just our best guess right now. So that is very much a placeholder, and I think speculative is probably an appropriate word.
All right, that sounds good. I'm sorry, there was one more thing under the fares. I noticed that the MRIDE fare wasn't included in the list. Well, in any, like it's mentioned once under Express Ride, but that was like a 62, like a I didn't know how the MRIDE was accounted for in the list of fares. Or if I'm using the term right, MRIDE does refer to the fare that the University of Michigan pays, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's listed under Express Ride as $62.50. I thought that we charged the university per that we had a per ride fare, not like a month. I guess I was assuming that was like a month since it was under with the Go Pass. So do we actually charge a monthly?
Yeah, we actually have a monthly pass that is sold, that they sell, but they cover half of the cost, to my understanding, if this is the pass I'm thinking about. The reason why it's not under the regular fares is probably because I don't see most of our contractual, that's a contractual for fixed ride not there, like we have with any other organization, we don't show it there as well. I don't see it there either. I don't see the other ones. So that's a different situation, I think, with the monthly pass. Is why we have it there, because they're selling it.
I have some mixed feelings about, I guess, maybe if there are other contractual fares being out of the budget, but especially MRIDE because it's such a high volume. Like so many of our fares are actually paid for through our partnership with the University of Michigan. Not having that called out in the budget seems a bit strange to me. But or I guess maybe notable.
If I might, just by way as a partial response, we do have a contract with the university for the MRIDE agreement. One of the things I need to do is formally introduce Dina to Steve Dolan over at the university, and we're gonna sit down and have that get together. Steve's responsible for their transportation of operations and budget. Steve and I have sort of informally agreed that a 6-month extension of the MRIDE contract might be appropriate. They're not 100% sure how things are shaking down. We're not 100% sure, so maybe kicking the can down the road makes sense. But in that contract, the cost of the MRIDE fare, what the university pays, is explicitly linked to our cash fare. So in an indirect way, this fare structure does reference it. If you were to increase the cash fare, it would automatically cascade into the MRIDE agreement and increase their costs. Out of courtesy, we would want to let them know well in advance if that was going to happen, because it would have a distinct budget impact on them. And so we're not proposing that this year, but I did want to clarify that there is a connection. But because it's sort of an external contract, I don't think we wanted to imply that it's the same as some of these other things. Yeah, I hope that makes some sense.
I do believe I understand what you're saying. That is in fact my last question. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Jesse. Anyone else? Roger, go ahead.
My concern is with the capital budget, the $1.25 million on the expansion.
Roger, you're a little quiet.
See if I can improve it. Is that any better?
It's a little better.
A little better? No, I don't have the greatest equipment. My concern is on the capital budget, on the $1.25 million on the expansion. Come out of these last retreats very clearly stating that ridership is sort of the top priority of the board, and in pre-pandemic retreats, we came up with the same pretty clear message that ridership was the first importance. We're now in the process of the long-range plan. We do not have a plan in place yet, so the board can review whether the plan addresses its concerns, particularly ridership. At the same time, we are proceeding with capital expenditures of over $1 million on long-range capital projects without a long-range plan. And although the two projects, the YTC and the BTC, might somewhat increase capacity, I think we've seen that increasing capacity doesn't directly affect increased ridership. Certainly the 2014 millage increased capacity significantly, and though we saw some rise in ridership, it was certainly not in proportion to the expansion of service. In my view, the way to increase ridership is to decrease travel time. And I don't see how either of these projects are going to decrease travel time to any significance. And so until we have a plan, I think it's imprudent to start spending large amounts of capital dollars without any assurance that those dollars are going to be affect increased ridership. Now, I'll certainly agree that the YTC is woefully inadequate for the system we have now, the sort of double hub and spoke system with YTC and BTC. But we don't have anything in the plan that clearly is going to, if we go ahead with those projects, is going to decrease travel time and increase ridership. So I don't think I can support the expansion part of this budget, capital budget, until after we receive and approve a long-range plan. Hopefully that will be in a few months, and if the board approves the plan, believes it's going to increase ridership, we can certainly amend the budget to start these projects. But I don't think we should do that until we have that long-range plan in place and the board is satisfied that that's going to increase ridership.
Can I counterpoint? Is that appropriate? I've been to a lot of stakeholder and public meetings with regards to the Downtown Development Authority and their projects, one of which is making people-friendly streets and specifically surrounding the Blake Transit Center. And it's and the 4th Avenue area. It's my understanding that because there's housing going in at the old Y Lodge, and that it's prudent for us to look at the Blake Transit Center and expanding it, because we have staging on 4th Avenue and 5th Avenue that we will lose once that housing is put in, if I'm correct. And so in my mind, the reason that we're looking at the Blake Transit Center is that we need to come up with another way to stage our buses for people to be able to get on them safely. And that's why we're looking at the expansion, not just because we're expanding because we think it's a fun thing to do. And then with regards to the Ypsi Transit Center, I have been out there many, many times in the wintertime in my wheelchair. There is when that transit center is packed, it's a tiny little center. It's unsafe late at night, and I think it's something that the people of Ypsilanti have waited long enough for, that it's necessary. I understand your point about ridership, but on the other hand, I also see that when that transit center was first put in, I don't know that we had the opportunity to get as much, to get more space than we did at that time. But now that we're looking at our opportunities, it seems to me the right thing to do to have a center that can not only be safe and accommodate all the people who wait. Have you ever been out there at a busy time and that place is just, the outside of the center is just packed? But also to have a truly functioning transit center. From what I understand, you can get bus passes, day passes, and things like that at the Blake or at Industrial at our main center, but that option is not available at the Ypsi Transit Center. And for an area that has so many people that are underserved and need those things, I think that it's time for them to get those. So that's my counterpoint to you, Roger. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that I wanted to add another perspective to what I believe is happening with wanting to have these two transit centers.
Thank you both. Matt, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I want to thank Roger for bringing up a concern with the recommended plan. I appreciate just being right up front with it. I do, and I want to provide a little bit of background about why you see the recommendation in here that you do. Certainly, it is the board's prerogative if you choose to amend the recommended capital plan, you can do that. It's just a question of voting and getting enough votes to do it. You certainly can do that, and we will work with whatever the board ultimately chooses. But I do want to say just a little bit about the rationale for why these things are the way they are. Reducing travel time is certainly one way to increase ridership. Providing more services is another. Physical buildings can become constraints, and they can become a barrier to increasing ridership. If terminals and garages are too small, Jesse made a comment earlier about glad to be able to start talking about increasing the frequency of bus service. Well, if we don't have a garage big enough to hold extra buses, the fleet can't grow. He's not going to get extra service. If the terminals are too small, they physically cannot handle the volume of bus traffic in a safe way. So these are real physical constraints, and they take years, as I think we're all realizing, they take years to address. I really regret that we don't have a board-approved long-range service plan already. It's been something I've been trying to get traction on for a while, as I think you know, and I'm glad it's in progress. What we've done in lieu of that, and until that is ready, is what I kind of think of as a critical path way of thinking, putting placeholders in to say, a lot of things might change, but what do we know we're going to need? Well, we know we're going to need garage capacity. We know the terminals are too small, and that expansion will be necessary. It may seem presumptive to do it, but I wouldn't want to wait until your long-range plan is done and do nothing in the meantime to advance these projects, because there's potentially years. And we have been working on all three of those projects now for some time. The Blake project and the YTC are a little bit different. The YTC is entirely voluntary. That's something where there's no external force pushing us into that. That's something we're pursuing on our own. The Blake Transit Center is, as Kathleen has indicated, much more complicated. The city wants to build on the Y lot, and we have attempted numerous times over the last 20, 30 years to get access to that property. And the timeline is frankly not ours for the choosing. We've been thankfully involved by the city and the Housing Commission in the development of the Y lot. They've been great partners to work with, and we want to continue to do that and be good partners with that. So that one kind of needs to move forward because that project is moving forward with or without us, and I wouldn't want to be left behind. And then one final comment. Yes, there are, looks like 150,000 for the Blake and $1 million for the Ypsilanti Transit Center. To be perfectly direct about it, when we talk about capital projects, that's not a lot of money. The actual construction of these projects will be much larger. So this is seed money. I think it's money that would go to a good purpose, very unlikely to be wasted. I think it's almost guaranteed that it will be very well spent money. But we certainly can understand trepidation from the board. It would be much better, I completely agree, to have a board approved project plan so that all these things can be laid out and everyone, you and the community, can see how all the pieces fit together. I regret that we don't have that. And if it's the will of the board to delay it until that is ready, we certainly will work with that. But our recommendation is based on, I think, some very reasonable assumptions in there. And thank you for the opportunity to explain that a little bit more.
Thanks, Matt. Any other questions from the board? Comments? Mike?
First of all, I would really like to compliment Dina and Latasha for what we're reviewing tonight. I think they've done an outstanding job in a very, very difficult environment. Uncertainty is so great. And furthermore, of course, Latasha, I think this is the third time she's been through budgeting with TheRide. And obviously this is the very first time for Dina. And the document that we have all received, it's over 50 pages. I hope people have really had the time to go through it page by page. I think it's a very impressive document. It lays out really what's behind the assumptions, what's in the numbers, and really puts a good context on everything. I've had lots of opportunities to give Dina and Latasha comments specifically, and particularly about the operating budget. And so I'm not going to add anything about that tonight. Of course, the operating budget and the capital budget needs to be approved next board meeting. We're really under the gun on that. But I'm going to move on to a little longer term perspective that's also in what we've seen today. It's been mentioned at least a couple of times. Ridership isn't getting back to the 2019 level until 2030. That, to me, is just an unacceptable assumption for our plans going forward. I'm not proposing we talk about that tonight at all, but I think we really have to talk about that over the fairly near term, about how we can get those ridership numbers up a lot quicker than, getting back to break even from pre-pandemic, not getting back there for 11 or maybe more years. It's just breathtakingly scary if we really believe that. So I think we have to do a lot of talking about the future beyond just the 2022 budget, which really should be our focus tonight and next board meeting too. I'm not expecting any discussion about that, but I just wanted to say that to me is a really important thing that we've got to be talking about in the future.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think we were all struck by that projection. So any other comments? So we vote on this next month. I'm sure Dina and Latasha would appreciate if you have any comments between now and then to reach out to them before our next meeting, where we'll go through this again and vote on it and have public hearing.
And I would, if I may, I would add there will be opportunities still in committee meetings throughout the month coming. So we'll continue to move along and consider your comments and make recommendations, and also very interested in hearing your comments. And I just want to say thank you as well. So far, the board's being engaged in this budget process has been awesome. And it's been very welcoming to me. And a huge thanks to Latasha, who did a lot of the heavy lifting on this budget before I got here, which is why I'm asking her to present and really participate fully in the budget process. So thank you to her for that hard work.
Yes. Thank you, Latasha. Let's move on to 4.5. Brian, you're going to talk about the Q3 service report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the interest of time, the service report was in the packet. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Raymond?
Yes, Brian, I did have a little bit of a question about some of the comparables between FY19 and FY20 and 2021. So looking at page 57 of the packet, I'm trying to square away in my mind the delta between, we can take revenue miles is probably the easiest one to just highlight. So for fiscal year 19, we show 956,000 revenue miles at an operational cost of 7.8 million. Then in fiscal year 20 Q3, it's a third of that in revenue miles, but the operational cost is almost the same. Then in Q3 of 2021, skipping over a column, we are at half roughly of what it was in FY19, and the operational cost is a little bit up. Can you help me understand, especially the fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, where the revenue miles are down by 2/3 or more, but the operational cost is the same?
Primarily is going to be labor, in that in Q3 of 2020, we had not yet laid off any operators, and we were paying overtime rates, the time and a half for all hours worked, and we were doing additional cleaning and bringing in companies to do misting and what have you at a very high cost at the height of the pandemic. So our costs really didn't drop at all, even though we had fewer miles. The only savings we saw was in fuel. But the costs of dealing with the pandemic obviously far outstripped those costs. So that would be the primary reason behind that difference between 19 and 20.
And Brian, if I might, the 60-day layoff notice where we were paying all the drivers for 2 months because of the layoff provisions, did that extend into the third quarter of that year? I can't recall.
I believe it did. I would have to get my fiscal calendar out because I don't have it in my head. I only roughly estimate when that Q3 is.
Yeah, our Q3 is where April 1 through June 30th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that could have easily been part of the answer there, Raymond, because of our union contract. We had never done layoffs before. And then all of a sudden we laid off 14%. And the provision in the contract was that we pay them for 2 months. It had never been triggered before. And we had to work through that. So that could be part of, like Brian says, the labor costs were still there, but the service wasn't.
Okay, so then maybe let's leave fiscal year 2020 Q3 off. Help me understand then the discrepancy or the deltas between Q3 fiscal year 19 and Q3 fiscal year 2021, where costs have gone up, but our revenue miles are almost half or just a little bit over maybe 60% of what they were. I mean, obviously there's inflation. I'm sure you still have some COVID protocols and things like that. I guess it was just kind of surprised I never saw the number for all the revenue miles that we cut back. It's not translating into a savings. And I guess the extension of that question is, as we ramp our revenue miles up, are we going to see a huge escalation? I mean, we just got the budget presentation. I'm not anticipating a 60% increase in our revenue mile costs, but should I be? I mean, that's what I'm just trying to kind of square away in my mind. You know, what should we expect moving forward? And what is that discrepancy between Q3 19 to Q3 2021, and how will that translate moving forward?
If I could ask for some time to research that and get you a more fulsome answer, I could have some guesses, but I feel confident about my answer on 2020. On 2021, I would want to dig into those numbers to be able to give you a better answer, but I can certainly do that if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine by me. That's fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, let's move on to 4.6, Matt, CEO report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only additions I would have, kind of gave you a little bit of a report on the RTA's deliberations earlier today. So that's hot off the press. And I'm happy to be back from some extended time off, and it's been a great week in the office. And I was joking with Brian that they did such a good job that all my furniture was still where I left it. So I really appreciated that. So it's nice to be back. Other than that, if there are any questions, we'll do our best to respond.
Mike?
Yeah, Matt, couple of questions of what is in your report. First of all, Nova buses, they are all been delivered. How are they all in service, and how is the public reacting?
Yeah, so there have been a number of manufacturing delays, as you might imagine, as you hear with the big three having to shut down and restart their assembly lines. The bus manufacturers were hit with very similar start-stop problems over the last year. I will confess there were some teething problems with these 7 buses. Brian's crew has done a fabulous job working with the manufacturer. The initial order had 8 buses in it. The first was that prototype, you may recall. It's been here for a while. The remaining 7 buses were delivered a couple of weeks ago. Thankfully, they seem to only have the very minor sorts of typical little, post-delivery issues that need to be wrapped up. Yes, I have seen several of them in service. I believe, Brian, they're on the Route 4 between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. I've spoken to several drivers about them, and they're getting used to it. It is a different machine. I know buses are buses to most people, but to those who drive them, there are subtle differences. And I'm hearing generally positive things from the workforce, although one driver hit his head, and I think that gave him a bad first impression. I have not yet heard anything from customers, but I think generally speaking, they're here, they're slowly getting into service, and so far so good. Brian, anything to add?
Just a clarification, we're running them on Route 6, but yes,
okay.
they are out and running.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I had one other question that had to do with your comment about the football shuttle. And you mentioned that customers can purchase electronic tickets on things like Easy Fare, which I think I'm familiar with. You've been using it for a while. And I think I'm a little bit familiar with transit. I think I've used it to do some planning of trips in, I think maybe other cities. But didn't recall you could buy tickets on it. But Uber, are we, is that Uber's taking our money and providing and passing that on to us so that we can provide the football shuttle? Or are they doing their own shuttling? And I don't know anything about Move It.
I confess I'm a little, just back. I'm not sure I have a great answer for you. Either my colleagues or any of my colleagues want to jump in and respond?
Easy Fare, part of the purchase of Easy Fare is an integration with Uber Transit and Move It, where it passes through to the Easy Fare, and Easy Fare is a brand name for a company called Masabi. And it's Masabi that collects the money, and then they can display our pass on their phone that they purchase through the Uber app.
Maybe I understood that right. But it sounds like there's some tie together of all of those. And Uber wouldn't be providing Uber cars when they wanted to take a football shuttle for a bus.
No, it's a way for someone to be able to use, they can, if they're a native Uber app user, but then one of the solutions for their trip includes riding public transit, they don't have to switch apps to buy the ticket and ride. The idea being that they can just do it all in one.
Although I personally would wonder how many of Uber riders would know that. But anyway, I'm glad that there's some flexibility there. Thanks for the explanation.
Any other questions on the seat, Kathleen?
My question is for Brian. Hi, Brian. So we have that Q strength study going on still, correct? Because it's been going on a little bit longer because of the pandemic. And I am really loving the Nova buses. I have not had an opportunity to ride one yet, but I had the opportunity to visit the one that you have had for a while. And you have the expanded front door so that it's wider. Wheelchair passengers have a much easier time navigating their way in and out of the bus. My question is, are we going to retrofit one of the Nova buses with the Q strength equipment to see how that equipment would translate onto the new buses? Or is that something that couldn't be under consideration because of time and energy and cost?
It is certainly something that could be done. I would say that at the moment, with the labor shortage that we're experiencing, not only is it in operators, but it's also in maintenance. And so I wouldn't want to add that labor right now. But it is certainly something that we could do if we wanted to try that in the future.
And I might add, and Brian can correct me, for those of you who don't remember, the Q strength project is an automatic wheelchair tie-down system on the fixed route buses. We've had them on some of the buses now for I think about 2 years. I'll be honest, the reaction we've gotten from customers has been very mixed. It has not been uniformly positive. One of the downsides about the Q strength is that the user has to face backwards in the bus. And although that is common in other cities, we've never done it here and our customers are not used to it. And I seem to recall some negative feedback about that feature. People generally loved all the automation, but they really disliked everyone staring at them, I think is how it felt. And so I don't know that we've reached a final conclusion on that technology, but Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's been a really clear home run. More of a mixed message.
That's correct so far, although we are still continuing the use and the study. And I guess one last note on that is we actually have had an offer from Q-Strain to assist with some things that they found successful in other cities in getting more adoption. I'll be honest, I have had quite the summer and haven't had a chance to take them up on that, but they have an absolutely fabulous representative. Kathleen, you met him, Mr. Laidlaw, and he has volunteered to assist us with some of those measures. So I do plan on taking him up on that. It just hasn't been top of my to-do list yet, but it will get there.
Thanks, Brian. Jesse, did you have a question?
Yeah, if we were ready to move on.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just want to make sure Kathleen was all set with the key strength question. Okay. Referring to the RTA, I'm beginning to, well, maybe not beginning, I have been feeling more and increasingly like we're maybe not getting the representation that we need at the RTA, that we don't have the lines of communication open. Is there room to start having some conversations with, I guess maybe I was misunderstanding the roles of the individual transportation agencies within the RTA. But the fact that they're doing these things that, we've never been, as a board, never been reached out to by anyone from the RTA. We've not had any conversations for the board. I'm not aware of Eric having had a conversation with them. I'm just a little bit surprised that things are that opaque in an agency that we have such a close professional relationship with. And I feel like that's something that needs to be fixed, because we're starting to get some pretty bad, there's some bad blood developing, it seems, and that can seem problematic for our ends, to be quite frank. Is there anything we can do? Is there anything being done?
Sure. Well, first I'll say there is and have been lines of communication. They haven't always been shared in high profile. The RTA has come to our board meetings in the past. Washtenaw County representatives Alma Wheeler-Smith and Ned Stabler have reached out to Eric and I about this issue of the American Rescue Plan funding after we sent a letter and asked them to maybe not use the money. They have reached out. Unfortunately, it was while I was out of work, and now Eric is out of town this week. But they've been very congenial in terms of no problem, when you guys are ready, we'll get back together. But generally speaking, we're talking about a jurisdictional challenge that's important to remember. The RTA is not made up of the transit agencies, it's made up of the counties. So Washtenaw County Board of Commissioner appoints the 2 RTA representatives out here. TheRide has no formal, legal, political relationship to the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners. We are not a creature of county government. We have no contract with them. In a normal year, we don't have any business with Washtenaw County, really. With the municipalities in our service area, absolutely, but not the county government itself. So there's a disconnect between the county appoints the RTA members, but the county doesn't ask us for input on any of those decisions. I don't believe the county and their RTA appointees have much conversation about the board's interests. So in spite of that, we do have, I think, very good regular communication staff to staff. We have had many conversations. I think Roger and Mike and Eric and perhaps Kyra have been party to those conversations over the last couple of years. But I would also agree that, yeah, it can be tense at times. There's jurisdictional overlap. What we do affects what they do affects what we do. And there's no real clear relationship, we are definitely in a situation where there is now a larger umbrella agency that can affect our finances, and we have no formal connection to them other than what that agency chooses to allow. And that has been a bit of a challenge, but we do have an outstanding invitation from county reps to speak, and I'm sure as soon as Eric's back, we'll take them up on it. I would also note that we have different missions. Their mission at a regional level is different than our mission. And I think that sometimes creates a difference of perspective.
I guess what's kind of been eating at me is that you referred to having found out about this plan initially through a tweet, and that they were, if we had somehow just not been paying attention, would they have reached out? Could they have actually made a decision regarding our funding without having spoken to us? And that's I brought up our own role as a pass-through agency to other transit before, and you've always described it as like we don't have any effect. We get the money from the federal government or from the state and we pass it along. We don't really, that's not our job. The RTA obviously takes a different approach, and so I'm a little bit it's giving me pause.
It gave us pause too. I believe you all have a copy of the letter I sent to the RTA on behalf of this agency. I think we were pretty direct. I've been pretty direct with them on some elements of their plan as well. Trying to be constructive, trying to make observations that I hope would resonate with them. But yeah, no, they sometimes make decisions and don't consult us. I'm not aware of any legal requirement that they have to, but that does send a message, and it is on.
But if they have so much control over our fate, then I'm wondering if maybe we should be getting RTA reports as part of the CEO report. I'm not saying that we need to send someone to their meetings. I'm not looking to, but like, I don't know how much work it would be to do like a brief write-up of their decisions, or to have. How do we start paying more attention to what they're doing if it's actually going to affect what we do?
It has been a challenge. I'm going to be honest with you. Most of their board meetings are really painful to watch or sit through. I did have staff detached to do that for a while. It became kind of pointless. And then wouldn't you know it, as soon as I detach those staff to go do other things, the rescue plan stuff happens and we don't find out about it until Twitter. In their defense, they have few options. But I think this is definitely a conversation that this board should have more of. I think Eric probably has strong feelings on it. There's a lot of sort of challenges and opportunities. I don't want to suggest that it's an acrimonious relationship at all times. The RTA is moving forward to restart the Detroit to Ann Arbor commuter bus service. That is something that we worked very hard with them and their previous CEO. It did run for 3 weeks before the pandemic started, and we're glad that they've decided to move it to get it back up and running again. Just so you know, the status of that is we're targeting October, and it really at this point it's a labor shortage challenge for the contractor, getting staff in, getting them trained to staff those buses. But the RTA has authorized the use of the money to restart the service. So we do appreciate that. That is one of your ends. But no, we don't always see eye to eye on everything. And yeah, I think we step on each other's toes sometimes, and more communication would probably be a great idea.
Susan, go ahead.
So I don't know how, again, playing the newbie card, would it be possible to suggest the creation of a board committee that would be our public policy committee, because it would seem appropriate that there should be a dialogue between Ned Stabler and Alan Wheeler Smith and a couple members of our board at policy level to policy level on a quarterly basis, just to be in touch with each other rather than waiting for the actions of a board, to actually proactively be sharing with them the status of where our work is as a board. It seems also that this public policy committee could be meeting with our county representatives. I think this public policy committee could be meeting occasionally with city councils of all the communities we serve. A public policy committee that at a board level is meeting with policymakers at these other entities seems like an appropriate place for proactivity and proactive dialogue specifically. So just putting out that idea so that we regularly are in contact, so that they are thinking to tell us about things that may be under consideration, and we can be sharing with them where our needs and issues are. So just suggesting it. I know I would be very interested to serve on that, to make those kind of proactive conversations happen throughout the year.
Well, I'm very excited to hear that, and I'm sure Mike and Jesse, and if Rich were on the call, he'd be excited to hear it too. So you're describing something that we kind of have a different name for. We have an ownership linkage task force that I think our last meeting was probably before you officially joined the board, but our preliminary objectives were to meet with our legal owners on a regular basis so that we do have those modes of communication open. And we did that with the city of Ann Arbor, the city of Ypsilanti, and Ypsilanti Township prior to the pandemic, and then things kind of lost momentum. The ownership linkage task force did meet again, and we're kind of revamping how we're going to accomplish those goals. So the way we left it was Rosa Maria was looking into not the minutes, but decisions that were made by the councils that might impact our ownership linkage in the future. And so I think it's a great idea to add the RTA maybe into that somehow. We weren't specifically addressing that, but that'll be something that we can discuss when the ownership linkage task force meets again. And we would be happy to have you on that task force.
That'd be great. I'd like to add the county to that as well. If they are the official participants at RTA, I'd like to add that in addition to the RTA Washita County representatives. Sure. So thank you. Yeah, I'd be interested to attend and participate.
Great. Anything else on the CEO report? Do we have any emergent items under number 5? If not, we have a list of our topics for next meeting. Obviously, the biggest thing will be the budget. Is there anything else that the board or staff thinks needs to be added to our agenda for our meeting on September 23rd? Okay. If not, we'll move on to section 6.2. Oh, Roger, go ahead.
Just wondered if we could get an update on the long-range business plan. What's the status?
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I wondered if we could get an update on the long-range business plan, just the status report on it.
Sure.
Thank
you. Okay, if nothing else, let's move on to section 6.2. We have public comment. Keith, do we have anybody?
One moment, Chairman Sims. We have Mr. Robert Pawlowski. Mr. Pawlowski, you've been unmuted.
Me again. So the one thing I want to mention is Mr. Smith and Mr. Yang and all their hard work they put in to the service restoration. I mean, we're getting to that point, and it's all the hard work they put in, the public meetings that they've set up, all of it. It's well done, especially the final proposal that was posted after the last meeting, the day after the last meeting. It was well done. And I want to give big thank you and to all the RIDE staff, including Mr. Smith and Mr. Yang, for putting up with all the comments and everything that, everybody shared. And a lot of the changes that they had to make after each meeting. So, but well done on the plan. It's really nice and looking forward to it. The second thing, I definitely agree with the CEO's point about there needs to be more communication with the RTA and this system, because the RTA, I've seen the board meetings. They're a mess. It's hard to sit through them. And I, I completely get, like, if we miss one thing, we wait, until it comes on Twitter the next day, and it's not right. Let's just say that, because they dread it. The meetings are so long, it gets tiring after a while. So there needs to be more communication, instead of these board meetings, showing up to them and then missing one part and then no communication afterwards. I completely agree with you, 100%. Last thing, I want to give credit to Miss Sims tonight on how she operated the board meeting tonight. She did a very good job. So big credit to you, Miss Sims. But other than that, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and hope y'all have a good night. Take care.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anyone else?
We do not have anyone else at this time, no.
Thank you. So we need to vote to go into closed session pursuant to section 8C. Or 8C of the Open Meetings Act, I'm sorry. Keith did send us a link a little bit before 5 o'clock for the other Zoom for the closed session. So you all should have received that. Do we have a motion to go into closed session? Kathleen? Second. Susan? Thank you. Mike? You're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Raymond?
Yes.
Roger? Did we lose? Okay. Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Yes for me too. So I'll meet you all at the other Zoom link. I think we have everybody. Yeah. So one item left, 6.4, adjournment. Have a motion. Kathleen, seconded by Roger. Go down the list again. Mike,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Roger. I heard your mouth, so it was close enough. Ryan,
Yes.
Jesse,
Yes.
Kathleen,
Yes.
Susan.
Yes.
I'm also a yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.